Okay, this talk is how to raise IQ. This is part 2, just a couple more suggestions. And some of these slides are new. Some of them you might have seen before in other lectures I've given. I like this painting. It's called Sadak in Search of the Waters of Forgetting by John Martin, 1812. And basically, he's got to climb all the way to the top of this mountain. And that's a lot like what education is like. You're just climbing and climbing. It's pretty difficult. A lot of times you're knocked back down a step. You got to go up 2 steps, knock back down a step. That's a common situation. And this quest-like mentality is very helpful for getting education. That's why running long distance cross country is good for cognitive performance. The same type of mentality. I got to keep going, pushing myself, pushes you through academics, especially when you're just getting started. All right, here's some tricks that really make a big difference academically. This right here is called outline format condensed notes. This is what I use for my diagnostic radiology residency written boards examination. The entire book, is already written. It was the Donart book. It comes written in an outline format. I don't know if I got one around me, but basically that way all the information is organized. The back of the book is indexed, and then I would add in little post-it notes, highlight notes. I'd cross-reference the pages to journals and other books. I'd write my own notes in there. I had a whole bunch of mnemonics, hundreds of them. I got a perfect score, 99%. I was a 4.5 hour test. I done like an hour and 10 minutes of perfect score. So trust me, illustrate. These are outline format condensed notes, highly valuable. I used to have 3 copies of that book, actually. I had 1 copy that I would use in conference with the other residents at the hospital. I had another copy that I really studied from, this copy right here, that I kept at home. And then I had a 3rd copy that I just put all my mnemonics in, because I had like over 600. I had tons of mnemonics to memorize, the manifestations of different diseases, for example. This one right here came later. This was with my neuroradiology fellowship boards, and this is called Illustrated Condensed Notes. I wanted all the anatomy, all the common diseases put into one location. So what I did was I took out a book that I really didn't use too much, and then I just taped all these pictures into it. And then I had tabbed indices so I could always find everything very quickly. You got to be able to find stuff quick. And then all this stuff here is the additional handwritten notes I would make on it. And I just crushed neuroradiology fellowship boards as well. And that was the illustrated condensed notes, was super helpful. Okay, here's another very powerful study technique. I didn't even start using flashcards till much later in my academic career. I was actually done with my fellowship boards, my first set of fellowship boards, by the time I started using these. And they're real helpful, though. And I interviewed some doctors who had graduated first in their class, and quite often this was a common study technique. And so in addition to using flashcards, this is a version of flashcards whereby this is called a spaced interval repetition system. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 boxes here. So this is the initial box. All the flashcards go in there. And then one looks at the flashcard, and if one immediately recognizes it, it goes to the next box and advances all the way to the 4th box, the completion box. And it's in the bathroom, so every time you go in the bathroom, which is numerous times per day, you're going to at least do a couple flashcards. If the flashcard is difficult, you don't immediately recognize it, then it stays in the 1st box. And the point of it is that stuff that's easy will very quickly get to completion box. Stuff that's difficult, you're going to have to go through it multiple times before you immediately recognize it. So this is good. It gets you to spend more time with the more difficult material, because a lot of students, they just look at their highlighted notes and they never really sort of challenge themselves. I would typically have a question on one side of the flashcard and then the answer on the back side of the flashcard, and that way you're forced to challenge yourself to know it. And you spend more time with the difficult stuff. Okay, here's a graph of what academics is like. A person starts out, I think I'd like to be a doctor and help people. Okay, and you got this vision of the future and maybe a role model or something else to inspire you in the beginning. And it's a lot of fun. Everything you do in the beginning, shadowing with an experienced doctor, watching a medical soap opera on TV, it seems exciting and fun and promising. Then you get to the long grind through college and grad school, like med school or something. It's like a memorization marathon. And it can be quite tedious, but you have to push through it if that's what you want to do. Then you start getting into the real world, more like residency fellowship And it's becoming more and more interesting. A lot of new stuff, hands-on application, real-world situations, and you get some rapid, worthwhile improvement there. Then by this time, you're now an attending physician, and things are starting to level off, and it's going to become a little bit more boring, okay? And then this is the typical path most people stay on. You kind of do the same old grind. That's what pays the bills. That's what everyone wants you to do. That's what everyone expects you to do. But my recommendation here is if you want to have more fun and make your life more intellectually interesting, you got to keep on trying to learn new stuff. And this is going to mean reading in other related fields, but different fields than your own, pursuing the hot topics, the controversial topics, but it's a little bit dangerous to do that. You get promoted for doing predictable research, predictable clinical work. If you do anything new and innovative, that could very quickly get you into trouble, get you fired. You might make less money. And if you find something, a discovery, and it contradicts, what somebody currently is making money off that has power over your organization, over you, you could very quickly get fired. So it's weird, but, in the world of sports, everybody loves a great performer. They get money and attention, and everybody's real happy with them. It's not like that in academics. If you become great at academics, a lot of people are jealous of you. A lot of people are resentful of you. A lot of people hate your guts and will try to get you fired and get you in trouble. It's weird, but academics is all screwed up. Academics is very narrow-minded, conformist. Lots of the people that are in the high prestigious positions are actually phony idiots. And so I tell you all this because it's a weird world to navigate. You can't, the person who's like the head of one of the Ivy League hospitals, that guy might be making a lot of money from a pharmaceutical company. So some junior doc comes along, makes a big discovery that shows that the big, profitable pharma medication is not working well compared to some other cheap thing. That guy could get fired in 2 seconds. Okay, so on the one hand, you say, oh, he made a great discovery, it's going to help all these patients. You know what? He just lost the Ivy League University big money. He's fired. Get him out of there. So it's kind of weird, but that's what academics is like. It is not like sports. Sports is much more noble. Sports is much more meritocracy. Okay, here's a picture of running cross country. I ran on the cross country team. That was me in high school. And, we went downstate, and it was a lot of fun. And all these guys are the best students in the school. They all had the highest SAT scores, and was a very good experience for me. By being around a bunch of these guys, this guy right here is an academic genius, and I used to hang around with him, and I learned a lot from him. Okay, here is a picture of a famous legend about Aristotle. And Aristotle was sort of a teacher for Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great had tremendous respect for Aristotle. Well, Alexander's men had complained to Aristotle that his girlfriend was causing trouble. She was a bad influence on Alexander. So Aristotle told Alexander the Great here to break up with her. The girl, her name is Phyllis, she found out and she decided to avenge herself. So Phyllis began to flirt with Aristotle, and then she asked him if she could ride him like a pony, and Aristotle agreed, and then Phyllis had told Alexander to watch from behind a tree. With Aristotle on all fours, she sat on him, pulled his hair, and spanked his bottom, and the point of this story was that even the smartest man in the world, Aristotle, could easily be chumped by a pretty woman. I don't even know if it's true, but it's a famous story, a famous statue, and there might be some truth in it. So there's different types of intelligence, obviously. Okay, things to avoid, very common problems. You don't want, if you want to have maximum optimal cognitive performance, you don't want to be doing any sport with head trauma. I know football is a lot of fun, the most fun sport, but the longer you play it, the more risk you are for significant head injury. Boxing is obviously a bad idea. Tons of head trauma, okay? Soccer is the one that a lot of people think is a good sport. A lot of well-meaning mothers, a lot of female doctors allow their children to play soccer, which I think is quite stupid. The kids get head trauma. It's not good for them. I knew a girl who was a superstar soccer player. She had to drop out of college. I've known other girls that were soccer players, and they're cognitively impaired from hitting the ball with their head. I mean, how stupid is it? The coach throws a ball from the side or kicks a ball from the side, and you hit it with your head. It's like asking to be punched in the head. To, hey, give me brain damage. It's stupid, okay? And you got to watch out. There's a lot of like mixed martial arts and different types of sports, kickboxing and all that. My advice, I know a lot of the guys. I'm friends with guys who are friends with guys who do this, and I like those guys. I like wrestlers. I like fighters. All that stuff I like. But I'm just saying is, pick one that doesn't have head trauma. Be my advice. I mean, do what you want. I can't control anybody. I can't even except myself. That's the only thing I can control. And so, what I'm saying is, if you're doing something where you're going to get punched in the head sometimes, you're going to get head trauma, and you need your brain every day the rest of your life, and you want your brain to last a long time. It's a long ultra marathon to keep it going into your 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. So avoid head trauma, okay? Avoid air pollution. You know, if a bus or a truck goes by, especially, I'll hold my breath till it's out of the way. You know, don't hang around near factories that put out a lot of smoke, okay? I don't even like swimming because you inhale all the chlorine and the chlorine byproducts. So I don't swim in a chlorinated pool. If I had my own pool in my backyard, I could make the chlorine real low when I was in there. But that's not good. Any type of noise pollution is bad. You know, people who live near airports have lower IQs. You need quiet so you can focus on whatever you're doing. You want a quiet room to study in. For studying, I like zero music, but you know, when I was young, I used to listen to Baroque music like Bach, Arcangelo Corelli, Telemann, Handel, that sort of thing. It definitely should be a melody and instrumental, never with a beat or never with words. Cell phones, I hate cell phones. I think they make kids stupid. As soon as you give your kid a cell phone, you know, within 6 months, their IQ drops 10 points. All they want to do is, you know, chat with their friends. They become more cliquish with their friends. You know, it's not uncommon. I caught my kids sleeping with their cell phone near their head, and I had to take it away from them, you know, move it farther away from them. They can't control themselves. Kids don't have myelinated frontal lobes, and they're just very impulsive, and they, you know, have to get that cell phone next text message. And I told me, like, my son liked a girl. I'm like, don't you understand? If you answer her text message so fast, she knows you're kind of desperate and you're head over heels for her. That's not going to impress her. You know, it's much better to leave it in the other room and, you know, text her back in the afternoon. Let her know that you got other things to do. All right, no TV. You shouldn't even have a TV in your house. TV is dumbed down to the lowest common denominator. I haven't watched TV in over 40 years, except, you know, if I visited my dad after he'd had a stroke and we'd have to watch a little something. Stupid people, you become like the people you're with. So always be nice to stupid people, but you don't want to hang around with them or they'll kind of drag you into their stupidity and their bad habits. Avoid stupid jobs. Don't do something where you're exposed to toxic chemicals because that can cause brain damage. You know, if you have to be a painter for a summer because you're desperate for the money, do some type of painting where you can ventilate the area well. Don't be in a closed room without an open window or something or door and be painting and inhaling all that stuff. Cigarettes, alcohol, MJ, psych meds, they all lower IQ. You stay away from that stuff. Caffeine's a bad habit. A lot of people do it, but it does not improve intellectual or cognitive performance, especially in the long run. My advice is to avoid it. All those so-called nootropic stimulants, I think they're all BS. Stay away from them. I never took any stimulant. I never did all-nighters. I think that's all BS. Fast food, and I've known other people who have tutored kids, you know, successful kids and unsuccessful kids academically, and they'll tell you too, those stimulant drugs, they impair cognitive performance, which is what you'd expect. The brain's designed to work as it is, not with all these drugs on board. Fast food, processed food, all stay away from all this junk food, of course. Get your sleep. That all makes you smarter. Okay, just a couple of quotes from some geniuses. You know, if you want to try to become a genius, you got to study geniuses. And, you know, you can learn a lot from them. I wish I had known about all these things when I was younger. Like, look at Ben Franklin. He focused on business when he was young so that he was really rich by the time he's 38 and he can do whatever he wanted with the rest of his life. Rather than the typical person in the rat race, you know, they got to keep working to help pay their kids' education and because they don't have that much money. It's nice to have money because then you're free to do what you want. But it's not always easy to get the money. That's the trade-off. Sometimes to get the money, you have to do something which might be very, very boring. Some quotes here. D.K. Simonton, he's a guy who wrote a book and he studies geniuses. A genius is someone who transforms their field. Okay, so a smart person and a genius, not the same thing. A smart person might be somebody who is rose to prominence in their field and is good at doing the known thing. A genius is somebody who can take it to a new level and sort of change how things are done in some part of the field. Aristotle, all geniuses have a touch of madness, yes. If you excluded all the persons who had quirky personalities or something weird about them, you'd have zero geniuses. When you read about them, you'll read just quite often how almost bizarre they are. Great scientists, philosophers are all maniacs. What else but blind singleness of purpose could have kept them in the groove? Mania is as priceless as genius. Ian Fleming. And from what I've seen, that's true. In order to be great at something, you have to be obsessively focused on it and quite often sort of trade a huge part of your life for it. So if you don't have that manic obsession with it, you won't achieve. To learn a complex topic, a man must love it. Goethe. True genius is more than lofty intelligence and imagination. Love, 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 that is the soul of genius. From Mozart. So yeah, Mozart was just immersed in music. Even in the worst times of his life, he was composing a tremendous amount of things. I thought the movie about Mozart's life, Amadeus, is great. That's kind of a good portrait of a genius right there. Okay, Bertrand Russell quote, "Something of a hermit's temper is an essential element in many forms of excellence, since it enables men to resist the lure of popularity, to pursue important work in spite of general indifference or hostility, and to arrive at opinions which are opposed to prevalent errors." So that's a big statement there. What he's basically saying is geniuses have to be a little bit antisocial. They have to say things that other people might find extremely offensive. And I'll just give you an example. When I was a young guy and I really wanted to be good at medicine and to really know what I was doing, I won the award, 333 students in my medical school class as the best student in pathology, the Otto Saphir Award. And I had studied the pathology textbook backwards and forwards and wanted to really know it. And I thought that, I was reading the Ivy League written textbook of pathology that I had really learned pathology. But now that I'm a much more experienced doctor, over 30 years later, I open up that same pathology book and my personal opinion of it now, I think it's a joke. I think it's a disgrace. I think the Harvard Medical School textbook of pathology is a disgrace. It is an insult. I think that book is an embarrassment. I think that book is something written for clowns. Okay, now how could I say such a thing? I'll tell you how I could say such a thing. You look at the atherosclerosis chapter, and there's nothing about all the persons who've made the biggest discoveries in atherosclerosis. There's nothing about Blankenthorne. There's nothing about Ornish. There's nothing about Kempner. There's nothing about, Sloop. I wasn't even planning on saying this. I just thought of this when I saw this Bertrand Russell quote. These are old slides that I found and I reorganized them. So what I'm trying to say is, that book's a disgrace. In the autoimmunity chapter, in the autoimmune disease chapter, there's nothing about leaky gut or about sodium. It goes on and on. Every chapter is pretty much sucks. When you talk about hypertension, there is nothing about no clear explanation of what sodium does, the relationship of sodium to hypertension, the relationship of a high dietary fat to hypertension. And to me, this is all bogus nonsense. Basically, when you say that a disease is idiopathic, meaning that the doctor's an idiot and the patient's pathetic, well, the joke is idiopathic means that nobody knows what causes it. Then you can say, well, you just got to take our drug. So that's ridiculous. Tons of people suffer. My mom, died from cancer. Maybe I could have helped her. My father ended up having complications from heart disease and stroke. I would have been able to help him better. I dug through that book backwards and forwards to memorize it as well as anyone could. And so it pissed me off that the important information that is well known out in the medical literature, the scientific journals, it was not in the textbooks. And not just for one subject, but for pretty much all of them. Same thing with hypertension, same thing with diabetes, same thing with cancer, same thing with autoimmune disease. It's ridiculous. Okay, same thing with neuropsychopharmacology. It goes on and on, one field after another. The book is wrong. It is not even mentioning the people who've made the relevant discoveries. It's an embarrassment. You see somebody from the 1800, all they knew was a phlebotomy. The head of internal medicine at an Ivy League school in 1800, doing a phlebotomy was a big thing that person knew. Whoop-de-doo. It's only good for a few things. And what I'm trying to say is a modern head of internal medicine in some famous place, all they're going to know is to prescribe a pill, but you can't cure a dietary disease with a pill, okay? So you have to learn something about diet. You can't cure a toxicology disease with a pill, so you have to know something about toxicology. And quite often, they don't know much. So anyways, you're going to go through all this effort, give up your life to train to be a doctor. You ought to learn the correct stuff. And for them to not put it in the books, and I wonder if they don't know it. They might just be that they're ignorant, but I wonder. Anyways, innovators and creative geniuses. So you can see how saying that could piss people off, okay? What I basically said is they're prestigious authors who wrote that world-famous textbook of pathology. They're either ignoramuses or they're liars, and I think they suck. And I would debate them anytime, anywhere, with no preparation. And I would crush them because they're complete ignoramuses or they're liars. Either way, they shouldn't be making a textbook like that. Okay, innovators and creative geniuses cannot be reared in schools. They are precisely the men who defy what the school has taught them. That's exactly correct. That's what I mean by an academics top-line performance. When you get beyond that academic stuff, A+ grade, and you get into the, are the basic premises of this field correct? People get very pissed off because quite often they're not. Universities are hostile. So that last quote was Ludwig von Mises. This quote is Ralph Waldo Emerson. Universities are hostile to geniuses who, seeing and using ways of their own, discredit the routine. Okay? It's kind of like the Schopenhauer quote, truth is first ridiculed, then it is opposed, and then it is accepted as self-evident. Okay, regular people should protect, and I'm going to say this, regular people should protect the geniuses who tell them the truth, because otherwise you're going to be stuck with Ivy League scumbag lowlifes who look at the pediatric psychiatrists at Harvard and some of these other Ivy League schools. Over-prescribing all these neuropsychopharmaceuticals to these little kids, attention deficit, so-called, mania in kids. And these kids end up having relatively poor long-term outcomes. It's like they're poisoning these kids. It's ridiculous. And notice, no one does anything about it. So that's why when somebody tells me, modern medicine is so technologically sophisticated and intelligent, I say bullshit, okay? In my opinion, once you've taken out the concept of a God-based worldview that values the individual, who believes that individual is partly divine, created in the image of God, therefore part animal, part divine, and you just say they're just a talking primate, Darwinistic atheism, you have a situation where that hospital, those Ivy League hospitals have no obligation to that patient other than to make money off them. If the person's just a talking primate, a talking monkey, are they obligated to tell them the truth? Are they obligated to provide them the best care? No, they're simply obligated to provide the standard of care, which is not the same thing as the best care, even though people think it is. Okay, genius can only breathe freely in an atmosphere of freedom. It's John Stuart Mill from On Liberty. Okay, here's an Albert Einstein quote. Most people say it is intellect which makes a great scientist. They are wrong. It is character. I am not especially clever, but I am very, very, very curious. The grand aim of science is to cover the greatest number of facts with the smallest number of theories. Yeah, Albert Einstein, he didn't have $1 billion and a team of PhDs. He just sat around thinking. And he was curious about some questions, and he kept digging deeper and trying to understand them. Isaac Newton did the same thing. Okay, that's a common thing, that really great transformative discoveries come from someone who is really smart, but not so much super high IQ, but pursued the question for a long time until they figured it out. Okay, here's just a silly conversation I had with my father. I was in 8th grade. I said to my dad, I've been having ideas lately that seem interesting, stuff that other kids don't think about. I said, I might be a genius. My dad says, well, what type? Are you a math genius? Me, no. And then he says, science, engineering, architecture, genius, musical, artistic genius. I said, no. Dad goes, well, I think I know what type of genius you are. I said, really? What? What type? He said, you're a bullshit genius. So, anyways. Okay, so here was my father. Here's my dad's brother. He was a physicist. Here's my dad's other brother. He's a physician also, like my father. And they would come over and they would argue about books. This guy, by the way, probably the smartest of them, except not for his diet. He used to drink a lot of whole milk and he died of a myocardial infarction at 51 years of age. But anyways, they would argue about books, and the arguments about books quite often be kind of nasty. And I didn't like the way he would insult my father and insult me too. And that was a great motivator for me to read, especially before a holiday when I knew he was coming over. So I would go to the bookstore with my dad. My dad would buy like 10 books at a time. I'd buy 5 books at a time. I'd read those books and try to discuss them with my father. He was working a lot, so I didn't always see him as much as I wanted to. But his role model as a man who reads a lot, works his tail off every day, reads books and can debate and argue about books, that was very good for me. And also I was in really good physical shape because I was a wrestler. Here I am, a sophomore in high school, and wrestling really kept me in good shape, kept me out of trouble too, because a lot of kids would go to parties and drink alcohol and stuff like that, but I was always wrestling and training for wrestling, so that kept me away from that kind of stuff. All right, here's a picture when I was in college. This is probably like my freshman, sophomore year of college. I came home for a little while in the summertime. This is my bedroom when I was growing up. I would read, these are some National Geographic magazines or whatever, but I'd read most of these books that are on the shelf and all this stuff. And that was pretty much my life. Wrestling and, studying, reading all the books and stuff. All right, and then here's freshman year at Stanford, and man, I was so lonely. It was the worst. I was in love with my old high school hometown honey girlfriend, but she was now far, far, far away. All my friends far, far away. I didn't know a single person, and I hated being so lonely. It was the loneliest I was ever in my life. It was brutal loneliness. And Stanford's not like a real friendly place. It's not like you get to talk to too many people. You're in a big classroom with hundreds of kids. You don't know any of them. And then I was on a wrestling team, and the coach, he invested scholarship money in me, so he wanted performance out of me. And I did okay, but I had some repeat injuries, which later on I did much better. But I initially had a bunch of injuries, and I was disappointed in that. So anyways, all I can say is that phase of being all alone, sink or swim, burn the boats, was a big motivator to study and learn. And so I didn't like it, but I've read a lot of people go through a difficult phase like that when they're young. And, coming through that and studying through that helps them later. Okay, so here is, the coaches. This was like the best thing about going to Stanford for me. There's Mark Schultz winning the NCAA AA finals against Ed Bannock from Iowa. There's Dave Schultz's brother. He also was NCAA champ. And I saw these guys, he was kind of fat, weak, and slow, not much of an athlete in terms of general ability, but his intellectual approach to wrestling, improving every little thing, I basically took that idea and applied it to academics, improved every little thing I could in academics because I was way behind, wanted to catch up academically. Mark Schultz had very poor VO2 max oxygen capacity, but he was very good at defense from having wrestled his world champion brother. So he could pretty much prevent anybody from scoring, and then when he needed to, he could score. This is like one of the greatest wrestling matches of all time. They both, were in the Foxcatcher movie, the whole story of Foxcatcher and everything. Here's Dave Schultz winning the Olympics. And I call his method of incrementalism. Improve every possible little thing that you can improve. And every single day, focus on improvement. And you'd be amazed at how much you improve over the course of months and years. This is another All-American NCAA champ, one of my training partners, and so I was used to being around world champions, All-Americans, national champions, so I was a good wrestler, but not as good as these guys. And that, me also being pissed off because I used to be that good of a wrestler, I had the Alfred Adler inferiority principle, wanting to overcompensate, because I was frustrated with my athletic ability not being what it was anymore, so that motivated me in academics, and that was a good thing, a very good thing. The other thing too is it can be good to be exposed to the intense competitive level of academics at Stanford. It's been said the average pre-med has an IQ of around 138 for pre-meds at Stanford, and that academic skills at least 99.5 percentile. The average Stanford SAT is, I think, 1410. It's going to be higher in the pre-meds than that. So to do well in that academic environment, you got to be performing at a 99.9% level, ballpark. So the key is to understand what is school. It's not just an IQ contest. It's a memorization contest. Once you understand it's a memorization contest, you need to get good at memorization. And if you're good at memorization, you'll do well in school. And you should study all those memory contest techniques. Study those memory contest champions. They've got a lot of useful tricks. This is just, a book I had written, Straight A at Stanford on to Harvard. based on that experience and what came after it academically. This is a book I wrote after med school. The dean wrote the foreword for this book. The Medical Student's Guide to Top Board Scores. I had gotten 99% of my boards, first in my class, and et cetera, et cetera. And I wrote all about the study techniques in this book and, strategies for memorizing biochemical pathways in biochemistry and stuff like that. Here's another book I wrote. I did 2 fellowships kind of in 1 year. I was going to consider being a neurointerventionalist, and I wrote the textbook for Amherst. That's an Elsevier company. And this was, there's me, the head author of, these are basically imaging guided surgery techniques. This is like a dialysis catheter, for example. I put in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of those. And during that year, I had a kid at home with the wife. I got fat. So I briefly, I'm not that tall, about 5'9", and I got fat. I couldn't believe it. Up to 220 pounds. Couldn't lose the weight for a couple of years. Finally lost it. Came back down to, I got down to 155. Now I'm a little more like 165, which is a good weight for me. I lift weights a lot. All right. And I moved to a house with a pool and a practice tennis wall in the backyard. Then I put up this big net behind it. So this was I loved this yard. I loved it. It was such a great thing. Come home, I could exercise in the backyard, could play tennis with the kids. It was a great thing. Okay, but it's a long story. I pushed my luck a little too far, and my kid, I came home one day from work, and my kid told me, he said, "You're a bad parent." I said, "Okay, why am I a bad parent?" And he said, "Because you don't help me get better at basketball. The other dads help their kids. They coach the team. They practice with him. All you do is work all the time." And so I wanted to help my kid. So what I did was we had this living room. We weren't using it for years, and we just were using it as storage. So I moved all the stuff out. I had a carpenter friend. He boarded up the windows, moved this basketball court in there. It's a wooden floor, so it's perfect for basketball. It's got a big high ceiling, and so the kids loved it. My kid practiced for hours every day. He became one of the stars of the team. Before, he was like 7th man, didn't even start. So anyways, though, but my wife went crazy. She said I was breaking the foundation of the house, and she insisted on moving. And so I ended up having to move, and oh man, that's one of my regrets right there too. It was the greatest house, perfect for exercising. Indoor basketball is a wonderful thing. Anyways, hope that was helpful.